Alright, I hope this is not too disorienting. Welcome to a short tutorial where I am creating a kaleidoscope effect in Fusion. So the kaleidoscope effect is actually based on the physical device Kaleidoscope. It's an optical device which is just an assembly of mirrors. I've chosen this effect not just because it looks funny, but also because I feel it's illustrative for certain motion graphics techniques. So I will start out very simple, just with a few transforms and create the basic structure of this effect. Then afterwards it will get a bit more advanced. I'm using a duplicate node, I'm using expressions to tie nodes together. The complexity is not really in the tools and in the nodes, it's more in the geometrical understanding of how you put these things together. And this is, I think, also what can be helpful if you're into motion graphics, if you want to do different effects. I think you can use some of this. To follow along, you can use whatever picture you like. Even the aspect ratio doesn't really matter. Let me create the basic version, and the essential tool here is the transform. So I'm adding a transform to the picture, and what I will utilize is the edge handling of the transform. Just to illustrate, let me zoom out a bit. So by default, edges is set to canvas, and canvas means it is cut off at the regular edge of the input image, and outside it's transparent. Now, what I can do here is, if I go to wrap, for example, then the image gets repeated infinitely. Or if I go to, let me reset this, if I go to duplicate, the pixels on the edge get duplicated. What I need here is mirror. So mirror mirrors across each edge. So this picture is mirrored here, you have the mirror image on top. This picture over here is again the mirror image from here, and it's again infinite. Right? So already by this I can get some interesting patterns sometimes. But this is not yet my kaleidoscope, because if I turn this, I turn the whole thing. What I need to do is to get these funny patterns which move in and out and so on. I need to turn the image inside the rectangular box or inside a limited space, and then turn them against each other. So I want, for example, this image to turn left and this right, and then overlap, and at the mirror the image will like move in and move out. So that's the kind of effect I'm looking for. To achieve this, I will just divide this image into 4 corners and then use the angle to spin them individually. First of all, to get a corner, I just use the rectangle mask. And for my rectangle to actually limit the picture, I will multiply the mask in the transform node. So in the transform, there is here under settings, there is multiply by mask. And if I multiply by the mask, that means the mask is applied to this picture at the end. So wherever I multiply by 1, it's 1, 0, it's 0. So that's how I get the mask from here into the transform. At the same time, it also limits where the transform happens. It happens inside the area, so this is the regular behavior. Now let me move this mask to, sorry, that's not the mask. Let me move the mask to the corner here, and I want to do that precisely. So I enter it, 0.25, was pretty close. And here it's 0.75, so 3/4 up, 1/4 to the side, 0.75. So now the rectangle covers exactly 1/4 the upper area. If I now use my angle here in the transform, you see that the image, the whole image rotates through this corner. And I don't get any transparency inside this corner anymore because of the mirror. If I had canvas, then it was cut off here, but with mirror, I get the reflection automatically. Now from here, I just need to mirror the corner into all other areas of the picture. And this I can do again with a transform. So after this transform, I add another one. And I also merge it. This is the merge. By the way, you could also use only merge. I mean, inside the merge, you have the same transform settings, the edges here and the transform settings up here. In this tutorial, I'm doing it separately because it illustrates better what I'm doing. So merge here only merges and transform does the transform. You can do both in one, but sometimes it's more visible what is happening if you separate it. So in this transform, I want to flip across this vertical line. And the outcome is I have this image mirrored over here. Now, this means that if this spins clockwise, this one will spin counterclockwise automatically. So this is already the kind of effect I'm aiming for. I need one more just to fill the bottom, one more transform, and again a merge. Sorry, wrong direction. Here we go. And in this case, across the horizon, the flip, and this is the final image. Now, if I want, I can even add one more transform where I zoom out. And if I do the zoom out via size, then I also have to, again, enable the mirror. Then I have, in addition to my mirroring inside, I can get the pattern repeated like this. Not repeated, reflected, actually. OK, so connect to media out if you want it back in the edit page. And this is already it for the basic scenario. Now, of course, I might want to animate this. For example, frame 0, maybe start from here, animate the angle, end frame, go maybe 360 degrees or even more. And perhaps at the same time, go to the transform and animate the size a bit. Perhaps I want to end here and start from here. Just as an example, then this is what I'm getting. All right, this is already my simple example. Let me use a new picture for the second, more advanced example. Now I want to build on this, but I don't want to just divide the picture into quarters and have it like rotate in the four corners. Instead, I want to have diagonals in here, and I want to slice the picture, you know, a bit like a cake into segments which go across diagonals. To do this, I first need a triangle with adjustable angle. It's more easy to show than to explain, actually. So I will not use polygons or triangle masks. Instead, I will use two rectangles and transform them in a way that I get a growing triangle, a shape that I can really control the angle of. So there are probably more than, I mean, there's definitely more than one way to do this, but this is the way I thought of and I want to show you. So I take two rectangles, I move them to both sides of the image. So one goes to the left, the other goes to the right. Again, I have to work precisely here. So 0.25, y doesn't matter. The reason is this line should be exactly in the center. That's my goal. Second rectangle goes to the other side. Again, I need to make sure the line is in the center, so let me move this to exactly 0.75. And now I will rotate this rectangle over this rectangle and use the intersection of both as my defining mask. That is my idea. Now, if I rotate here, I'm just rotating across this center point of the rectangle. I want the center point of the frame. Now, in here, I cannot really control this, so I can just add a transform and transform the rectangle itself through a transform node. Now, one thing went immediately wrong here. If I just add a transform node or connect by default, the masks always go into the mask input by default. But now I don't want to mask the transform. I want to transform the mask. So the mask needs to go into the background this time. And you can transform masks the same way you can transform images. So if I have the transform here, the transform by default has the pivot in the center and rotates around the center. So now if I go into the transform and rotate, I really rotate around the center. Let me connect the second rectangle as a mask. Now I do the same trick with the multiply again that I did before. I multiply the two masks, and by multiplying, I will only get an output where both of the masks overlap. That's where they both have alpha value 1, and in this area, I get my output. Now, with this trick, I have something that starts like a triangle, and then I only have a small issue because my mask is not big enough. Let me quickly fix that on the rectangle here. So I'll just make it much, much bigger, much longer, and I also make it wider. I just have to pay attention. I still need to hit the center. To do that, let me just put it here on the boundary. That's easy to calculate. I put an x value of 1, and then I make the width also 1. So 1 here gives me, again, the exactly the center of the image for the edge. Now if I go back to the transform and change the angle, now I have created myself a clock wipe, at least for half a clock, and then this happens. I only need half, that's enough. This effect really just 3 nodes together, and I have such a mask. So if you enjoy motion graphics, learning to play like this with masks and transforms and so on really gives you lots of options, just a few tools, and suddenly you have something like this. Now, of course, this is only the means to an end. Let me again add a transform. Now I do something similar what I did before. I mask off the transform, and what we did with the rectangle before, I now do with the triangle. Multiply by mask again to get a triangular section. Next, I need to mirror this. I can't really mirror directly across the diagonal, or at least not easily, but you can mirror across a vertical line, right? That I have actually done just before in the simple example. So again, a transform node will do all I need, and a merge node to throw it directly together. And in the transform, I will just transform this triangle to flip it over here, flip across this line. And in my merge, I'm now getting this. Okay. So that's a beginning. Now, how can I get this not only transformed across this, but mirrored all around? Now, if I look at this, you can see that the mirror image of the triangle across this edge is actually this image if I spin it around. So if I copy it, transform it over here to move this edge against this edge, I have again a mirror image. Now I can do this with the transform, but I want more than just one transform. I want to cover the whole circle. And to do this, I will now use the duplicate node. Control spacebar for my tool selection, duplicate, or if you prefer the menu, right-click, add tool, effects, I think, effect, duplicate. So that's the one I'm using now. Let me make some space here. And the duplicate node takes the background image and copies it as often as the first parameter copy says. For example, 3 copies means original plus 2 copies, 3 total. And in each copy, I do a transform as per these parameters. Right now, I haven't done anything, but if I change the angle, you see what happens. So I have 1, 2, 3 copies, and each copy is transformed to the last copy by this angle. So now I could manually adjust the angle, maybe adjust this angle again, so that it all fits together. If I just quickly think about it, right now I have 3 copies, so I would want this angle to be 120 degrees, so that 3 times 120 is 360, so I get the full circle with 3 segments. But the segments don't touch each other here, and that is because the angle of my triangle is still too small. So if the whole thing is supposed to be 120 degrees, then this triangle would need to be half of that. So here I have 2 triangles next to each other, so half of 120 would be 60 degrees. And this way I have it completely covered. Now, if you want to, you could stop here and enjoy the result, but I actually want to have this in a more custom way so that I can quickly change the number of how many reflections I have here, how many triangles I have here. And for this, I will now use expressions. And expressions are just a tool how you can use mathematical terms, basically. Don't be scared, it's easier than you think, inside a parameter. For this, I can right-click and click expression. And what happens is you get a field underneath. So far, nothing happened. But in this field now, you can write numbers, but you can also write parameters. Now, I used 120 degrees because I wanted to use the full 360-degree circle and divide it by the number of copies. So that was 360. And here I can use plus, minus, everything. I can divide it by, and I want to divide by this number. This number is the parameter copies. So I can either type copies, or I can use the plus sign and drag it with the left mouse button onto the parameter. And there I have my copies. If I press enter, the parameter is automatically set. If I now put a different value, let's say 5, then it automatically adjusts. Or 4 is, I get my rectangles again, 90-degree angles. And well, let's use 5 for this example here. I have adjusted the angle here, but I have not adjusted the angle here. So this angle, I said before, should be half of this angle. And I can do this as well with expressions and thereby tie these 2 tools easily together. Again, I need to add an expression to the angle. And another way to do this is you can just press equal here, by the way. Just equal, enter, and this will automatically give you an expression. In this expression, I need the angle from this tool. Now, I could select both tools and still maneuver with this plus sign here, but to be honest, that's not really easy. So easier if you go across multiple tools is usually to type. So I just type duplicate 1, which is the name of this duplicate tool, then a dot, which means I access a parameter from the tool, duplicate 1, dot, and then I need angle, which I can also type or again, just do this. Then you get, again, the name. Enter. And 72 is actually the angle from here. This doesn't look right because I didn't want to use the angle itself. I wanted to use half the angle because it's only the triangle but not the mirrored triangle. So divide by 2. And there we go with a, what is this, pentagon? Anyhow, 5 edges, yeah. Okay, so now I have tied these two tools together. I have done all the angle calculation, and I can just go into the copy anytime and change the number of copies and get a new result. By the way, just for fun, you don't need to use integers. You can also use in-between values. But what will happen if I have 4.7, for example, I have 4 copies and then a transparent, semi-transparent copy. Well, maybe not that useful here, but it's a slider, so you can do it. Now with the duplicate, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because it doesn't have the edge, mirror, wrap, etc. settings. So the duplicate, unlike the transform, cannot do this edge mirroring. Now, what can I do? My transform still can do it, and my duplicate can cover a larger area if I have done so before. So what I will do now is I will just extend the space where I'm working here. And rather than extend, I will first take the simpler route and just shrink my whole thing. So I take my original picture and just shrink it, the size. I shrink it in half. Now everything got half the size. I mean, my frame is still the same size. I'm not changing my frame size, but I am scaling down my image to half the size of what it was before. Now, all the settings here still remain intact and work beyond the image. And my duplicate is now in the middle. And now I can scale it up again at the end, add again a transform to the end, and double the size again. Then we are back where we started, right? Except that this time, since my space around is larger, if I now activate the mirroring in the transform here, you will see that I mirror outwards and further outwards than I need for my duplicate. So my duplicate now, let's look at it one at a time. So in my mirroring, I go now to the end of the frame, which gives me more than just the actual area which I'm interested in. And my duplicate now takes the whole thing, and if I stretch it out again, I go back to the inner area. If I transform it out, then I get this result. So if I now change the angle here, see all kinds of interesting, fancy effects coming up. There's one funny thing which you might find by accident. If you look at the angle here, you see, well, I keep I have my pentagon shape after I duplicate it. However, if I don't do the mirroring here, if I turn this off, you see another funny thing. I have my pentagon shape now, but what happens if I change the angle? My shapes change. And that is because beyond the my focus area in the middle, I have still these rectangles rotating, and as they rotate in and out from my transform, and as I mirror this, I get different shapes just by the superposition of the shapes and the rotation. So if I maybe turn the checker underlay off, you can see even better the result. And this by itself might already be an interesting effect. I think it's quite nice to get so many different shapes and so many different effects out of just one angle change. Okay, but back to, this is not the kaleidoscope. I wanted to fit the whole frame. So to go back to the kaleidoscope, I turn on the mirror again, and I see here in the final output my full frame covered. And what I did in the first example, I can also do here. I can scale out and just resize and turn on the mirror. One final note on resolution. By doing this trick with the transform here, where I scale down and then blow it up again at the end, by this trick I do get enough space for my duplicate. However, I might lose some resolution. Now, in general, whenever I have only merge and transforms, I don't need to worry about it. And the reason is that Fusion internally will combine these nodes, unless you have a flatten transform somewhere activated. If I do flatten transform, that means Fusion will only calculate up till here, then calculate pixel by pixel an image, and then use this image again in downstream in the further calculations. But otherwise, if I don't have this flatten transform, then regular transform and merge and so on will be combined. So you will not really lose resolution, because Fusion takes the image from here and does the full calculation in one go. So if you do scale up, down, etc., it doesn't really matter. However, there are certain tools which break the calculation and which work pixel by pixel. And about the duplicate, I'm actually not 100% sure. I think it might break the calculation. Unfortunately, it's not in the manual. But even though it does only things like transform, it's in the effect area. And I've seen some effects before which make me believe that it might break the calculation. What you definitely want to avoid are tools like blur and these kind of effects, highlights and so on. These will typically break the calculation. So if you can avoid it, you don't want to put them in the middle. You want to put them at the end. If you know that your resolution may be impacted, instead of doing the scaling down, you could also just take a bigger frame size to start with. You could merge it over a frame of twice the size, right? Or you can use a scale node to scale your image up and scale the frame size up to twice the frame size and work only in the middle area, and then at the end crop it again. So that could be the solution in that case. Of course, if your final transform goes out, then your resolution is no issue at all anymore. Let me stop right here. So in this advanced version, I used again a lot of transforms, the duplicate node, and I tied them together using expressions. If you want to learn more about expressions, let me know in the comments. There's much more that you can do. You can use different mathematical functions in here. You can use modifiers, tie multiple parameters together, create your own parameters, build custom tools. There's a lot of this more technical stuff which goes towards scripting, which you can do in Fusion with expressions. So if you're interested in this technical thing, let me know. I don't have anything in mind right now, but if there is interest in these more advanced technical aspects, let me know. I could probably come up with a tutorial about it. Otherwise, I would also like to point you to one tutorial from Shetal Gazda, I hope I pronounced the name right. He created a Fusion 8 tutorial on the Kaleidoscope effect, and I noticed his beginning is very similar to what I do, but then he creates a diagonal exactly by the frame diagonal, and to do this he needs like sine, cosine, tan I think function he uses in order to get an angle which works independent of the aspect ratio of the frame. So he has a slightly different approach, and it's also instructive. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this rather playful effect in Fusion. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials to come. And if you have any comments or suggestions for me, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.